So what if a 3,000-year-old text wasn't just old stories, but a gritty, tactical field manual for modern life? What if you could use it as a blueprint for dealing with everything from burnout to, toxic enemies, and have it feel like it was written yesterday? Okay, let's dive into this because today we're going to unpack a pretty radical framework for resilience, and it's drawn from a source you might not expect.
Wow. That kind of hits you right between the eyes, doesn't it? It just completely reframes how we're supposed to look at hardship. See, it suggests the problem isn't the adversity itself. The problem is how our strength, or our lack of it, measures up. So, how do we build that strength?
All right, so the first step in this blueprint is all about understanding the environment we're actually in. And here's the key idea. In this system, adversity isn't some annoying bug that needs to be patched. Nope, it's a core feature.
Now this is where the perspective really flips. Think about it like a gymnasium, but for your soul. When you lift weights, you're literally creating tiny micro tears in your muscles. They only get stronger because they have to heal from that trauma. Well, this blueprint argues that our daily troubles, all those little frustrations, are those necessary micro tears for our spirit.
And this comparison just lays it out so clearly. Normally, we see a flat tire as just a frustrating delay that ruins the schedule. But in the resilience blueprint, it's a small stress test. A rude comment isn't just a personal attack. It's like a little 5-pound dumbbell for your emotional fortitude, getting you ready for something way, way heavier down the line.
This ancient question, which was posed to the prophet Jeremiah when he was just completely burned out, is really the whole philosophical argument in a nutshell. Complaining that today's 5-pound dumbbells are too heavy completely misses the point. They are the only way you'll ever be ready to compete with the horses, the major crises that life is absolutely going to send your way.
So, okay, if adversity is our training ground, how do we actually build our defenses? Well, the next part of the blueprint focuses on a danger that's way more subtle and maybe even more insidious: simple neglect. This progression is frankly terrifying. The text describes walking past the field of a lazy man, and it doesn't start with total ruin. No, it starts with a little slumber, just a little bit of putting things off. But that small neglect compounds. It gets worse and worse, until the protective stone wall crumbles. And then, ruin doesn't just show up. It arrives like an active, hostile force, an armed man who breaks in the second your defenses are down.
This is such a real question, right? Because we all know people who do the work. They build their walls brick by brick, and then a market crashes or a medical diagnosis comes out of nowhere and just levels the whole thing. So what does the blueprint have to say about trying your absolute best and still failing completely? The text totally anticipates this reality. It says a righteous person may fall 7 times. And you have to understand, in ancient literature, the number 7 often represents this sense of completeness, a significant, maybe even devastating amount of failure. But that's not the end of the story.
And that is the crucial point. The defining characteristic of a resilient life isn't that you avoid falling. It's the stubborn, relentless persistence to get back up again and again and again. The real failure isn't falling down. The real failure is making the decision to stay on the ground.
Okay, so we've worked on our internal fortitude. We're getting back up. But what about the ultimate stress test? Dealing with people who are actively trying to tear it all down. Let's look at the psychology of handling opposition.
I know. This tactic sounds incredibly counterintuitive. Heaping burning coals on someone's head sounds aggressive. It almost sounds like weaponized kindness. But the mechanics behind it are actually a brilliant psychological maneuver. Just look at this breakdown. When someone attacks you, their brain is primed for a fight. They expect hostility. They're ready for a counterattack. By giving them bread instead, you short-circuit their entire neurological script. Those burning coals aren't literal. They represent the intense, hot flush of shame and cognitive dissonance they feel when they're met with unearned grace. You're basically forcing a system reboot in their brain.
But, and this is a huge but, there's a massive caveat here. The blueprint puts a very severe boundary on your internal motive. See, the natural human impulse is to do a little victory dance when the person who wronged you finally gets what's coming to them. The text says, nope. Doing that is spiritually dangerous.
And that level of restraint, it demands incredible self-mastery. So the blueprint applies that exact same principle to our words and even to the wisdom we chase after.
The text uses these absolutely stunning metaphors. Apples of gold in silver settings. That's not just talking. That implies immense care, deliberation, and craftsmanship. And a gentle tongue breaks a bone. That is some profound psychology.
Force just creates more resistance, right? But a soft answer can bypass all those defenses and get to the heart of the matter, far more effectively than shouting ever could.
Get this, the blueprint even has a warning against what we call toxic positivity, and it describes it with this incredibly vivid chemical analogy. When you tell a grieving person to just look on the bright side, you're not comforting them. You're pouring vinegar on soda. You're causing a chaotic, fizzy, irritating reaction in their spirit. It's just complete emotional tone deafness.
And what's really fascinating is that this same idea applies to even good things, like wisdom. The text says wisdom is sweet, like honey. But then it warns you, eat too much honey and you'll vomit. The moment your pursuit of knowledge stops being about wisdom and starts being about seeking your own glory, about being the smartest person in the room, it becomes toxic. Your ego corrupts it.
All of these concepts, restraint with enemies, care with our words, humility with wisdom, they all bring us to the final and, honestly, the most sobering warning in this entire resilience blueprint. Just let that image sink in for a second. A city broken down without walls. It's a devastating picture of total, complete vulnerability. It's the final image of everything we've been talking about. A lack of self-control leaves you utterly defenseless.
To put that in modern terms, it's like running a major financial network with zero firewalls, no passwords, and the server room doors just propped wide open. You are 100% defenseless against any malicious code or bad actor that just happens to wander by.
So how in the world do you rebuild those walls? The blueprint says it's not about more willpower. We all know that stuff has a hard limit. It just runs out. Instead, the strongest walls, they're built from a completely different material. The text points to a concept known as agape, an unconditional, self-sacrificial kind of love. This is presented as the true reinforcement for the soul, moving way beyond our own limited strength.
You know, we've spent this whole time analyzing all these threats out there, adversity, enemies, toxic situations. But this blueprint leaves us with one final, really provocative question to think about. What if the most dangerous threat to our well-being isn't the chaotic storm outside, but simply the internal walls that we've neglected to build in the first place?